Welcome, everybody. We have Stefan Lorenz Sorgner here, who's a German philosopher whose main interests are transhumanism, posthumanism, and the ethics of emerging technologies. He is a professor of philosophy at the John Cabot University in Rome and the editor-in-chief and founding editor of the Journal of Posthuman Studies. So welcome again. Look, we did an interview quite some time ago, back in 2014, on Nietzsche, the Overhuman and Transhumanism. I'll be adding a link to this video as well in the description, so anybody who wants to see that can. And also we bumped into each other serendipitously in the wild in Kyoto, Japan, at the Golden Shrine, Kinkakuji, earlier this year. So it was really cool. So welcome, Dr. Stefan Lorenz Sorgner. Great to have you back after more than a decade. How you been?
More than a decade, indeed. Yeah, that was a very detailed interview on Nietzsche and transhumanism. I don't think anyone has ever made a more detailed interview on that topic ever before or after, actually. And it was wonderful meeting you, actually, by chance, sort of at the temple. I was there at a keynote at the Moonshot project the Japanese have, which is jointly organized by Kyoto University and the university in Tokyo. So I was there for nearly 2 weeks. Talking about, I was invited because of sort of my take on transhumanism, and sort of the organizers actually telling me, they invited me because of my more, let's say, philosophically grounded work, philosophically in the sort of continental tradition grounded work, and also less utopian understanding than what most, traditional transhumanists have basically presented, and that was the reason. And they were able to relate to that specific approach, and this is why they invited me. And because it's a massive governmental project, and they really want to realize a lot with respect to gene technologies, brain-computer interfaces, as well as digitization. And it was a section on the legal section, which basically invited me, and they wanted to have some impact from a transhumanist perspective.
I wish I had known about that. I'm in the dark, right? Like you're part of this big sort of web of connections where all the conferences are. I'm in this little lonely backwater at the bottom end of the unfashionable end of Australia. So, oh well, what can you do? I've made it to a few. I've organised a few of my own.
I didn't know any one of them who basically sort of, it was just like, it's just an email coming in, inviting me out of the blue. People I never had contact with, I knew before, they just came across my writings and they said, do come over, it's a really big event. And so I gladly accepted the invitation, spending nearly 2 weeks there.
It was weird, like you were just walking, and the instant I saw you, I know that face. It's got to be Stefan Lorenz Sorgner. Larger than life, mind you.
You are Stefan, this is Stefan Lorenz Sorgner. I hear voices, like there were voices in my head. It was beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about Euro-Transhumanism. Even though we met in Japan, we're talking about Euro-Transhumanism. Maybe we could have a Japan transhumanism emerging sometime soon. Or Australian transhumanism, yes. But the Euro-Transhumanism, well, let's start by asking if you, an elevator pitch, an elevator definition on Euro-Transhumanism, 2,500 words or however you like, and one concrete policy that differentiates Euro-Transhumanism from mainstream transhumanism.
Actually, sort of Euro-Transhumanism does go back to the paper I published in 2009, where it basically stressed the relevance of Nietzsche for transhumanism. So that was the initial stimulus. And I mean, initially, my occupation actually with transhumanism has gone back more than 25 years ago, like when Sloterdijk talked about Heidegger and Plato and Nietzsche with respect to emerging technologies relating it to transhumanism. But yes, so and then, as a consequence of my entire engagement with transhumanism, it sort of came about. So that specific grounding is really something which is absolutely needed, which can give a more comprehensive understanding. Euro-transhumanism does not represent a eurocentrism, does not affirm that this is sort of that it demands universal validity. That's essential as foundational grounding. That's important just to stress at the very beginning. So a sort of an elevator pitch would be that Euro-transhumanism draws upon the ethical, philosophical, and scientific local paradigms dominant in the European cultural tradition. I coined the term in 2022, and in particular it represents an alternative to classic transhumanism. There are many different types of transhumanism. By classic transhumanism, I particularly refer to like Nick Bostrom's version of transhumanism, which has become so widely popular, in particular in Silicon Valley. And in particular, sort of what I thought what made it necessary to distinguish myself from that many different insights, in particular that sort of classic transhumanism in favor of a libertarianism, whereas Euro-transhumanism defends sort of a liberalism, classic liberalism. It could also be said a democratic social version of liberalism. On the other hand, sort of the traditional classic version is based on utilitarianism, whereas Euro-transhumanism in favor of a hermeneutic understanding, a situated understanding of values and norms. It does not affirm utopias as classic transhumanism does, but scientifically based visions for the future. It is not anti-Nietzsche, it sees Nietzsche as an ancestor of transhumanism, is strongly drawing upon Nietzschean thinking. It does not affirm like a Renaissance ideal of perfection, but strongly rooted in a radically pluralist understanding and concept of the good life. It rejects the notion of immortality, but it strongly affirms the relevance of a prolonged health span. It is not pro-enlightenment, but has a very ambiguous attitudes towards the Enlightenment, and is strongly critical of the notion of superintelligence. So it is, which is being affirmed by classic transhumanism. So it has doubts concerning the possibility, at least concerning the realization of superintelligence in the nearby future. So that would be like a short summary of some of the most essential points concerning Euro-transhumanism.
Yeah, so it's grounded in continental philosophy, Nietzsche. You mentioned others, Heidegger, Foucault, maybe, I don't know. It's not in opposition, maybe it's in opposition, but it's certainly not the same as Silicon Valley libertarianism. The next question was, what policies would Euro-transhumanism reject that other transhumanist sort of stances might accept or might endorse?
In particular, sort of, one of the elements is it's sort of the focus on virtues. And the virtues which Euro-transhumanism in particular affirms, which is a focus like on, and they are related to the notion of autonomy. In order to promote autonomy in a liberal understanding, it is impulse control, mindfulness, and truthfulness. Actually, in order to be fully autonomous, autonomous, you need to firstly, be truthful to yourself, to be mindful of your interactions and relations with the world. But at the same time, impulse control is extremely relevant to be able to stick to what you subscribe to, and sort of our frontal cortex is only fully developed by the age of 25. So in particular, and that is responsible for impulse control. So in particular for impulse control, young people before the age of 25 have an enormous challenge dealing with that. And they're easily getting influenced by the cultural circumstances and by social media and so on. So that is something which is strongly highlighted. In particular, some further virtues I'm strongly subscribing to, sort of grandezza, raffinatezza, and fiducia. That's more of something I'm affirming, and there might be some people who affirm it too. Different people might have different preferences, but I think it's sort of the importance of actually working on yourself, dedicating yourself, developing strengths, then being very refined with respect to your strengths. Nuances really matter significantly. And the final and most fundamental element is a relationship to others. It's a fiducia. It's a trust. Trust is absolutely central for what I'm not saying everyone should subscribe to it, but for me and the people around me, it's utter trust. That is so fundamental, and that needs a long-standing relationship. That needs a strong, long-standing connection. That one doesn't simply turn around the next day and block someone. That one doesn't simply turn around and sort of move into a different direction. That one has a firm grounding, and that which one can rely upon, for a long-standing time. So trust is absolutely fundamental. Secondly, sort of that the virtues, and they need to be considered within education, for example. Secondly, then there is the issue of freedom. Freedom in comparison to a libertarian version understanding of freedom is not just negative freedom. It is not just the absence of constraint, but it's also the consideration of, it's food, it's shelter, but it's also healthcare. And that has a relevance concerning, affirming a universal healthcare system. It has also got on education. Education becomes relevant insofar education in the US system is extremely expensive. And education, I must say, sort of, the university education in Germany is really good, actually. And there are many,
and it's very cheap.
And it's quasi for free. You need to pay like 200 euros for 6 months, and in the end you actually get public transport in the entire county for the 200 euros. So you might get more than what you actually pay for. And so I would, if money is
the only thing you have to do is learn German.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say. If money was a central issue, and
I was thinking about doing that.
Learn German, go to Germany, because it's really making sense. So it's a second issue.
I was thinking of moving to Berlin for that very reason. Very cheap education, great education.
Exactly.
But I have done some German, but I'd have to get pretty fluent to study the stuff that I'd want to study, right?
Exactly. But when it comes to direct policy implications, I guess that's what you're asking us. So universal healthcare system is a central element. I would also stress sort of promoting research in gene technologies. There's a lot of hesitation now in talking about Europe when it comes to working on gene technologies. But even globally, I mean, the reaction to the sort of the research which was undertaken in China, it was globally banned even by very libertarian ethicists. So I didn't understand that when sort of the genetic vaccination against HIV was undertaken in China. So I think much more openness. We need to be proactive in that field, and we need to be able to take risks. A third element would be sort of how we deal with digital data. And we need to find an alternative from the authoritarian Chinese version and from the libertarian US-based version. And I think actually, we need to find something which considers freedom, but also enables obligatory comprehensive collection of digital data. And I've made some suggestions in my We've Always Been Cyborgs book. So I think we can learn something from the Chinese without having the authoritarian system which is present there, by protecting freedom. Actually, freedom, I would go further, freedom can only be promoted in an appropriate manner, actually, by an obligatory comprehensive collection of digital data. A lot could be said on that issue. And the fourth point, which is central, I guess, among the direct policy recommendation, would be promoting a digital infrastructure. What can stressing the relevance of AI without having good infrastructure or the appropriate companies who can do so is not a good way of dealing with that. So in particular, that openness concerning emerging technologies are elements which I would strongly highlight.
Are there any views that you've had, or that you've had, relation in relating to Euro-Transhumanism that has been revised? Is there any beliefs that you've had to change, or that you've changed, either because somebody had an argument with you and you had to change your mind because you update based on new evidence, or you did your own self-study or reflection? What if you changed your mind about it? How has Euro-Transhumanism changed as well?
Exactly. No, that it's really this openness, given new information, is absolutely important. In particular, so it has happened. For example, sometimes I've just received additional scientific information which I had to accommodate. But when it comes to sort of philosophical issues, I used to think sort of, how can any serious person be against universal healthcare system? The advantages are so enormously striking. But then, I do realize the advantages of a libertarian system. I do realize sort of the money which is needed, in order to undertake risky research. The willingness to invest, and I'm aware that this is happening in the United States. I'm aware that some of the best treatments concerning specific diseases are only available in the United States. And that investing in more risky research is very conservative when there's a public administration. However, and this is sort of so. However, at the same time, I still think it's possible that this can be done. And one of the reasons maybe for highlighting that is also, let's see what has happened in China. In 50 years ago, they were like one of the poorest countries in the world, and they've just really revised their understanding, and now they've got more double-blind, peer-reviewed publication than of scholars than in the United States. They are not just copying; they're now innovating as well, and this is clearly not a libertarian system. So, you can innovate without being, and that can also apply, in different fields and different domains. So that clearly shows that, libertarianism is not the only plausible response to the question of how to be able to innovate in the field of medical sciences. So this was where I understood more and more also the advantages of different systems. And where I had to be, much more nuanced and much more subtle within my responses to specific issues.
Nice. Are there any myths about Euro-transhumanism that you think needs clearing up?
I was in a way the first person in the IET, for example, in the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, who strongly draws upon continental philosophy. Most of the other people, have such a strong grounding in the Anglo-American, in the analytic tradition. So I saw also the hesitation, basically, to deal with these kind of approaches. They're just metaphorical, they're just poetical, they don't know what's going on in the sciences, they don't have the nuance grasp of the specific happenings in the field of AI and gene technology. They just vaguely talk about very poetic system, and when it comes to direct policy making, they're either very bioconservative, or they have no idea what is actually going on in the field. So these are some of the reservations concerning a more continental approach or Nietzsche-based approach in general. Then there was a hesitation concerning drawing upon Nietzsche as being basically a fascist, which is, that is not the case. He does have some problematic implications, but he clearly was not an he was not an anti-Semite. He actually explicitly stressed that he was an anti-Semite. So sort of the reservations concerning Nietzsche, and there was some, some transhumanism clearly said, we want to protect transhumanism from getting a bad reputation by being associated with Nietzsche, and I still think no, there is no need to protect transhumanism from being associated with Nietzsche. Then innovation can take only place in a libertarian system. That's another sort of prejudice which I already tried to hint at before. And some would say sort of what I hinted at before, what I mentioned before, sort of about data collection. Data collection digital data collection needs to take place in a comprehensive manner, and I've received the response that is a utopia too, that it cannot be realized either. And I mean, I see a lot of pragmatic challenges. I see it also as a pragmatic necessity that this will have to occur. But like one of the direct responses which stresses that it's not a utopia, well, it clearly can be done in China. The Chinese have managed to realize comprehensive digital data. Everyone in China needs to share the data with the government, and outside of China, it is TikTok, it is Huawei, it is Alibaba who basically need to share the data as well. I'm not defending a Chinese authoritarian system at all, but I'm just saying that it's not that's a clear evidence that it's not a utopia. So these are a couple of issues which I wanted to address in order to stress, no, it is not just a myth. Here are clear evidence which you need to understand. So the responses need to be much more nuanced and much more considerate of what the opponent or what the different views have to say.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Let's do some broach some philosophical topics. In transhumanism, would you say transhumanism, the Euro style, is closer to critical posthumanism than mainstream transhumanism?
Oh, it clearly is more closer related to critical posthumanism. So concerning the ontologies, the understanding that we are embedded beings, there is no ontological autonomy. The self as being completely distinct from the rest of the world and entities. That is basically shared. It's shared by Nietzsche, by Spinoza, by Heraclitus. It's shared by critical posthumanists. The problem I have, and this is why I praise the firm elements of critical posthumanism, but why I'm clearly different from them is basically when it comes to ethics and political issues. Ethics are fictions. Norms and values are fictions, from my understanding. They are made in the human, on the basis of human interests and invented by humans, and we can change, we can alter them, and that is not being shared by critical posthumanists. They basically highlight, because we are embedded in relational ontological structures. These relational ontological structures also need to be considered on the ethical, in the political field. Basically, when there's a big power difference, from their perspective, it is clear who is in power and who's not in power. And furthermore, sort of the younger one is never in power, the poorer one is never, and so on. The less famous one is not in power. So and sort of the one who's always oppressed is the one who cannot even give full consent, even if the person is a competent adult in the situation. And this is what it means to take relational structures into consideration. And I completely disagree with that. I think relational ethics, relational politics is paternalistic. It is borders to it has totalitarian implications. Once you're a competent adult, your agreement, your judgment needs to be taken seriously and into consideration. And one of the reasons, in order to reply also to critical posthumanists, is power is perspectival. The younger one might be, the power of the younger one might be stronger. The power of the poorer one might be stronger. The power of the less well-known one, it might be stronger. It really depends on the perspectival interpretation of the people involved. So I don't share. Though when it comes to ethics and politics, I'm extremely critical of critical posthumanist approaches.
Well, let's talk about Nietzsche. Now, Nietzsche was inspired by Spinoza, if I'm not wrong, right? Now, Spinoza had the idea of the conatus, that's fundamental drive of all things to preserve their own being and increase their power and sort of, level of perfection. Now, this sort of does relate seemingly to the will to power. Maybe it's not as expansive as will to power, the Nietzsche stuff, but what are your thoughts on Spinoza's conatus, and how does that, if at all, inform Euro-Transhumanism?
Definitely. So, in particular, when it comes, so there are a couple of connections between Spinoza and Nietzsche, sort of the tribes element, which then also it goes from Spinoza. It already had an effect on Goethe, then later on Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. And one can say, and then Freud, and they're different. So that is the movement towards the evolutionary turn, taking Darwin basically into consideration from a continental perspective. And I find it particularly intriguing because evolution can unfold itself in different manners. Evolution can be considered as a drive for survival, as a mere drive for survival, will to live in Schopenhauer, but that's not all there is to it. One needs to go beyond that, because sometimes sort of the cultural dimensions also need to play a role, and they're relevant. But the culture is rooted in evolutionary struggles. Then there is a next element. There's the aspect of reproduction, of sex. That is particularly strong in Freud. So, there's a clear connection between evolution and reproduction. However, again, this is not all. If you all refer to basic biological functions, many other elements, cultural elements, couldn't even be considered. You would end up in a very naive biologism with a clear binary understanding of sexes. And sometimes it seems to me that Elon Musk is stuck, in particular when it comes to his transgender daughter, that he is stuck in such an understanding. And then the next step would be Nietzsche with his will to power ontology. So it clearly states that there are elements, it's not just survival. Survival for many is not even an issue. Reproduction nowadays can be realized better by means of technologies than by traditional sexual reproduction. We all it's the information, at least, by taking reproduction in our own hands, and that we've got the potential to moving much further in that respect. But with the element of power and the realization that power is perspectival, we also define our identities. We define our sexual identities anew. Maybe as someone, as non-binary, as being, attracted same-sex attractions. Before as asexual, we have a great diversity of different sexual identities, for example. And here the element of the cultural comes in. That has a lot of implications. So here the cultural can be related to an evolutionary drive, and this is by means of the consideration of power and the perspectival nature of power, as it's been highlighted and mentioned and dealt by Nietzsche. And I think this is so when we talk about the evolutionary turn, and that's particularly relevant for transhumanism, we need to understand that evolution can unfold itself in many different dimensions, elements, and it's not all related to such pure survival, to sex, but it also includes the power structures and cultural elements and dimensions.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that there's drives that weren't as explicit just from selection pressures from evolution, that when intelligence came along, that is sophisticated enough intelligence came along, then there was more of a drive for cooperation.
Exactly.
I think that's it's going to be interesting, into the real long-term, future of life in the universe, not just human, but if we're just not a so rare fluke in the universe that there's life that might arise other places. Maybe in another 100 billion years, the universe, many parts of it will be saturated with life, or the technological descendants of organic beings. Now, there's going to have to be a lot of cooperation. So, amongst
exactly,
intelligent agents.
Cooperation also the consideration, it's not just like a speciesist approach. It's not just we consider just other humans because they're human beings, but we need to consider other entities because they also have a similarly the high capacity for suffering. So a new concept of personhood, which takes into consideration like apes and dolphins and magpies and other animals much more strongly than what we used to. By the way, the Spinozian connection, there are more elements, as you mentioned Spinoza before, which could be mentioned because it's also the non-dualist ontology of becoming. It's sort of not a categorical substantial difference between the material or the psychological and the physiological, but they're closely entangled with one another. And that leads to another implication which is being shared both by Nietzsche as well as Spinoza, insofar that both recognize the necessity of fate, the necessity that everything happens by necessity, but at the same time we feel free because we don't know what's going to happen. So we need to make decisions as if we're free because we feel free. But on the other hand, the intellectual realization that everything happens by necessity, and that's sort of the tension. That's a tension I don't think we can resolve, but I think it's important. Both need to be taken into consideration. And that's been mentioned by the amor fati in Nietzsche, but it's also mentioned by the intellectual love of God in Spinoza's philosophy.
Talk about amor fati. Do you think there are inevitable convergences in values that, let's say, long term, like far future mature civilizations will just inevitably sort of gravitate towards?
I'm not sure about that, actually. I've got my doubts. And that has to do with sort of the I mean, we see a development. And I think from the criterion which I'm embracing, I do see, I think it's better now than it was in medieval times. Sort of that recognition for, it says human rights or personal rights. I would rather say personal rights, a consideration for others. Much less harm is done. Dignity is being affirmed. But, and then some people are making such, they're like the new realist philosophers who basically say, no, there's some things which are objectively valid, like the concept of human dignity in the German foundational law. And I said, well, yeah, look, the Big Bang happened like 14 billion years ago. And like the entire universe was just so self-directed that the truths of the human dignity, as it comes up in the German foundational law, it all steered and moved towards the unfolding in the German foundational law. Come on, you don't seriously believe that. But that's what you need to believe in order to make such a claim concerning like even objectivity of something like personal rights, universal validity. And I think, no, the things are changing. We're living in a very dynamic environment and dynamic world. Luckily, I am very happy that we now embrace an understanding where basically these, personal rights are being upheld and autonomy. I strongly defend that. But, on the other hand, I can imagine a situation where we have a significantly further developed political AI, which could actually make much better decisions than we would. But if that's possible in the future, if that is possible, we might need to, I will have to revise my understanding that autonomy, the ethics of autonomy is a wonderful achievement. So far, I don't do so because I don't see that yet. But I'm not excluding the possibility. And that would be a significant revision from basically the understanding which I'm currently affirming. That is sort of the reason why I'm sort of, it's not a permanent and directed development towards the better. Radical changes can occur given cultural, natural processes in the world. And that's why I'm not excluding that, eventually, given a different circumstance, I might have to end up significantly revising the values I'm embracing, but that is all still rooted and founded in the understanding that the values and norms are rooted in human interests, And
Yeah,
they're
I
just
guess the sort
fictions.
of thing I'm thinking of, like, well, we know that there are convergences in evolution. We know that along different phylogenetic branches, different species have sort of converged to have very similar body designs and very similar sort of behaviors. Even octopuses, they have like, brains, and they can do sort of, they can reason to a degree. But the divergence from our phylogenetic branch was so far back that it's very hard to believe that that it was just a fluke, right? Uh, Eyes have sort of There's been convergences in evolution towards eyes. It's just such a useful thing. I think there's going to be convergence towards like a cooperative behaviour. Um, there will be probably be defectors as well, but I think in the long run, cooperation. My hunch is that it'll probably be the dominant sort of strategy out there. Yeah. So, okay.
Some type of convergence, yeah, sure.
But these are broad convergences. Like, there might be there might be a convergence towards liking chocolate more than strawberry, but that's less sure, right? I can't really imagine that an alien species would just objectively converge to liking chocolate more than they like strawberry, or pineapples on pizza or something like that. But when there's a necessity, for instance, there's only a finite amount of resources in the universe. There's a lot of resources, but there's a finite amount. There's also a finite amount of time. Although we're very, very early in the life cycle of the universe, hyper intelligent beings will probably want to live out however long that they can. Civilizations will remain intact for as long as possible, and any kinds of danger to that will be sort of looked at and as being very, 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 very dangerous. How can I say that? They'll be sort of frowned upon. So I imagine there will be a lot of cooperation and steep steep laws, steep prohibitions, steep punitive measures against sort of warmongering and defection of these sorts of things, because the stakes are just so high. I mean, if you knew you were going to live until the end of the universe, or if you knew that you or whatever you cared about was going to sort of exist for such a long period of time, unless one of your neighbours came along and blew you up, you'd want to do as much as possible to sort of set the agreements of all the sort of neighbouring people who also agreed with you that we should penalise any sort of defection-oriented civilization steeply enough to disincentivize them from burning wastefully resources that could, war. It's there's a lot of resources that are sort of burnt up very, very quickly and wastefully, and a lot of starvation, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I imagine these are the sort of convergences I think will probably happen, but I might be wrong. But these are my hunches.
The thing is, you see, some critical posthumanists, for example, they do strongly cherish the cooperation with also different species and entities. And as a consequence, and I'm really critical of them actually, and they were radical posthumanists, and they highlight basically, well, the destruction, the carbon dioxide emissions are primarily due to us humans, and as a consequence, biodiversity is getting reduced. We are basically the reason for so many species dying out, and as a consequence, they propagate antinatalism. The world would be better if there were no humans around. Let's don't procreate. Humans die out, and then the diversity of different species can flourish. That can, and I just find it so. Of course, we have interests, and we need to consider our interests, and that is sort of when we talk about all the different species being considered and surviving, it could go into such a direction, and that's what I'm a bit worried about, at least. So, because of the finite resources and because of finite space, yeah, that's a challenge, at least concerning a peaceful, permanent, peaceful cooperation. maybe.
Yeah, yeah. We don't know. Like, I imagine some people saying like super intelligence will definitely be dangerous if it gets out of its box, or as soon as you build super intelligence that's uncontrolled, it'll just land somewhere arbitrarily in the space of all possible values, and most likely those values will be divergent from human values, and AI will automatically maximize its own values, and in some way they'll sort of wipe us out, either indirectly or directly. But I kind of worry that they're missing the bigger picture, and I don't think the landscape of value is very arbitrary. I think there are attractor basins within the landscape of value that pull rational agents towards them, especially very rational agents. Now, there can be bad attractor basins and there can be good ones. The bad ones will still lock you in, but they may lock you in and sort of quell you from thinking any differently. Like a religion that tells you if you don't believe, keep on believing. If you reject the particular God that they believe in, then you'll go to hell for time and all eternity, and all those sorts of lock-in faith-based belief systems. But there might be other ones which are relatively good, but have enough accommodation for learning that they allow you to move on to bigger and better things later, like the scientific method. You know something about how the world works, but embedded in that sort of philosophy is the idea that you need to know more, and you can update your belief based on new observations and new reasoning about those observations. So yeah. Anyway, I think that's kind of diverging a bit, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Nietzsche said, I was just like last time we spoke about the overhuman. Which Nietzsche text do you think matters most to Eurotranshumanism? If you were to pick one.
I mean, the idea of humans being the bridge between animals and the overhuman, the Übermensch, is mentioned in particular in Zarathustra. So it's a very poetic text, but also it contains a lot of philosophical insights. So that is definitely something which clearly represents that evolutionary idea that humans are not the end, but it's a continuous dynamic development which takes place. When it comes to tracing our norms and values, then the genealogy of morals is very good, sort of just for an understanding of how we ended up having the values and norms which we are. And if we sort of want to move on for the future, it's also Beyond Good and Evil is a very good text stressing sort of the perspectival nature of our norms and how they strongly connected to our interests. But yeah, so no, it's definitely reading. My own reading was at 13. I started reading Nietzsche. I started reading Heraclitus, and Heraclitus was commented on with excerpts from Nietzsche and Plato. So that's why I ended up with Plato and Nietzsche, and and for me, sort of Nietzsche represented that non-dualistic thinking which resonated, and on the other hand, there was Plato always referring to his base, and Nietzsche saw as Plato as the ancestor of the Judeo-Christian tradition of a dualist way of thinking, but Plato was he was enormously influential, and it's so beneficial also to read Plato. In particular the Republic, for an understanding of the society we ended up with, and the fascinating thing about Plato is that he recognizes the importance of the sophist, because he always presents as sophists the ones as that everything is interpretation as his main antagonist. So this is really a wonderful dark triangle of text, sort of Heraclitus, Nietzsche, and Plato, in order to get a very helpful understanding concerning the world we live in.
What is there any Nietzsche writings which you would de-emphasize in relation to Euro-transhumanism?
Which I de-emphasize.
Yes.
Which I strong. I mean,
is there any incompatibilities within like Nietzsche's writing collection, or any of his ideas that you think are sort of a little bit going too far or not compatible in some way with your vision of Euro-Transhumanism?
Yeah, his political ideals are unclear. And sometimes, I mean, he's clearly critic of utilitarianism, liberalism, democracy. So he seems to be more of a favor of a communitarian, authoritarian understanding of politics, and I think they're very, I think autonomy is a wonderful achievement, a cultural achievement which I strongly defend and highlight. So these hierarchical political understandings, which he doesn't actually work on so much, he hasn't developed them, he didn't develop a clear political system, but it always comes out in his aphorisms that this is something he cherishes, and there are some dangerous, I think there are some at least problematic elements which can be associated with Nietzsche's reflections. So his anti-liberalism is particularly strong. But I must also say, just to strengthen again, sort of he's not an anti-Semite. So this is something at least he's hostile. We really finds it disgusting that his sister was married to an anti-Semite who founded such a Aryan community in Southern America, and so on. So and he abhorred these developments. So he was an anti-Semite and a good European. He also was very critical of German nationalism, which are like two of the most problematic elements, which can be associated with the Third Reich. So in that respect, so even though he had sympathies for a communitarian, more authoritarian maybe structure in politics, he was not a fascist in the sense of the Third Reich. So just to highlight that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. So what about this self-overcoming and this current? Do you think that's important? Is it important to overcome the self?
This is what This is so the self-overcoming that's what one of the fundamental neighbors now. What sort of transhumanism is all about, self-overcoming. If not that, what else? No, it is. There is no stability. There is no core self. There are no specific functions which we need to, teleological functions which we need to realize in order to have a fully flourishing life. But there's once we've reached the goal, there are further goals to develop. We can be creative. We can be self-determining. We can, form ourselves into a poem, into an artwork, in the sense. So this is what is actually the dynamic nature of being a human being is what is so central for transhumanism, and that's also an element which has always been strongly highlighted in Nietzsche's understanding. It goes along with a notion that power is perspectival. So someone who in Scotland might be interested in timber tossing, because it counts as a high power in Scotland, but no one in the rest of the world is really interested in it. In a different setup, it might be, knowing the history of soccer in a specific field, and for some other ones is being a good tennis player, and so they're very different. The criterion of what counts as a power is very much dependent on the community you're based in. And for Nietzsche, it was actually the criteria. The highest power was to interpret the world as being, as a world of, to interpret the world of becoming as a world of being, to change the worldviews of people, and that's what, according to him, Plato has done. Who suddenly, that for now, 2,000 years, people started to believe that there's an essentialist, unchanging realm of forms and immaterial afterlife, and he wants to turn that upside down. And I found that a very intriguing enterprise, which then was continued with, from Spinoza and Freud and everyone else. And that's what transhumanism seems to be all about, too.
Where do you sit with egalitarianism and anti-egalitarianism? Is Euro-transhumanism leaning one way or the other?
When egalitarianism, ontologically, it doesn't make any sense. Egalitarianism in an ontological sense, that we actually are identical subjects. There is something which is a core human essence that is related in the end to the Judeo-Christian, to religious traditions, and it's an outgrowth of the Western tradition. So ontologically, I would say, no, of course, we are all different, and different also with respect to the powers and capacities which we possess. But the important thing is that, the ought is ought fallacy. From what something is doesn't mean that we need to derive an ought from that everyone ought to be treated differently. So from the element of, that's why I think sort of autonomy is a wonderful cultural achievement, even though we are not equal in any ontological sense. But regarding
we all need nutrients. We all need air. And
that is a more functional understanding to a specific organic. But I'm just talking about respect, ethical respect, which we, of course you're right insofar, we share 50% of our genes with bananas and more than 90% with the apes. Of course, we share a lot of the genetic traits, but there are always some genetic traits in which each one of us is clearly different from anyone else, even from a genetic twin, even from an identical twin. Because of epigenetic changes which occur. But the important thing is sort of from an ethical point of view. We've created the fiction of personhood. We are all persons, and all persons need to be respected in an equal manner, as being worthy of equal consideration. And that is a great achievement. And I'm consciously talking not of human dignity, I'm talking about personal equality, of equality among persons, in order to accommodate that personhood is dependent on the capacity to suffer, on the intensity of the capacity to suffer, and not just on belonging to the species of human beings. Insofar that, that opens up the possibility to also accommodate non-human animals and potentially, eventually, maybe also some AIs.
There's a nuance there when well, it depends who's saying it, but often ethicists who know their stuff will say equal consideration of similar interests, not all interests, because often everybody has divergent interests. Like, I like guitar, you might like harpsichord. I might like, I might like chocolate. You might like strawberry. I might like pineapple on my pizza. You say that, hey, that's just objectively wrong. Okay, but there are similar interests, and I have an interest in, health and general well-being, and generally not suffering, and having a flourishing life. I think these things are generally similar to other humans, and often is the case other species as well. So there are similar interests there that we can all agree that we share, but there are differences. There are divergences.
There are divergences, and primarily the focus should really be on protecting the respect for the person, insofar as the person might actually live a completely different life and have different interests from the ones you have. I agree. No, the majority cherish health, 80% according to some study. However, the limits of the interest are always there where the interest of someone else begins. Or at least whenever there is direct harm being done to another person, then it becomes morally problematic. And then we need to intervene. And I'm sure that people have interests which basically say, no, I'm only happy when I directly harm another person. That might be the case, but then we as a society contractually agree that we need to intervene. We cannot allow that to happen.
Well, can't they just get their thrills from indirectly harming people? Right? All they need to do is just put a switch and a little wire and some sort of mechanism that does something. So they're not directly harming anybody. They're just pulling a lever. They can still feel happy about the suffering being caused somewhere in the world as a result, but as long as it's not direct harm, hey.
Yeah. I wish it was.
Of course, I was joking.
I wish it was so easy.
Yes, but that's the thing. I mean, when we're talking about trying to manage the interests of different agents in a population, there are going to be values which diverge. People have incoherent values even with their own mind, but their values are incompatible sometimes with other people within the same population. But what can you do? You have to make policies that service everybody. You try to anyway. And so the similar interests can be served. Everybody needs to eat. Everybody needs a place to live. They need exercise. They need health, right? So in that sense, you can say, well, maybe we can accommodate sort of like be egalitarian on the interests which are similar across a population. And be anti-egalitarian or whatever you want to call it, have accommodation for a wide variety of other interests as well that are not shared in a population.
Yeah. And another element, another challenge which I like to highlight is sort of, even if you've got certain interests and know you've got certain interests, it's not always the case that you're strong enough. You might be immature, you might be too weak in order to subscribe, to stick to your own interest. And, I teach at I've got many young people in university, and so I see things happening, and there's so many, who've got an understanding. I really want to take care of myself. I don't want to just fuck around, but then in the end, sort of the culture is so strongly influencing them. A hedonist culture, embracing just like go out and have fun, get drunk, and go out with the next guy you're meeting. And then and that really has been strongly corrupting people, and who then later on regret what they're doing, and that has to do with a lack of brain development, which takes place up to the age of 25. Because there's a lack of impulse control among the people below the age of 25, and then they so strongly get influenced by the peer group, by the cultural group they're surrounded by, and they suddenly have have sex with 20 people, and then they realize, well, maybe that wasn't in my interest. I didn't cherish my hygiene, my health, my value, my taking care of myself. And I unfortunately see that happening too often. That people popping abortion pills as if it was a chocolate. And that's really sad. So, and how, that's why I think education and impulse control and actually sticking to your values is something which really strongly needs to be promoted and cherished and dealt with as well.
Yeah, I'd say also among adults, right? I mean, there's even in this new digital age, there's a lot of things that are pulling at our attention, right? There's organizations which require our attention in order for them to actually operate. Facebook runs on ads, and so does most of the social media out there. So in order to pay themselves, in order to run a successful business, they need to sort of grab our amygdalas, grab our attention and pull it somewhere and get us to spend money. How are they going to do that, right? They need to either convince us that, hey, what they've got, what these advertising is selling is really good, and you really should need this. Now, sometimes that's actually by building a very, very useful product. Sometimes it's about training us to, I guess, lower our rationality levels or our reasoning abilities, or making us become more extreme or emotional in our purchasing behavior. So there's incentives out there to work against this. This ability to have a strong sense of value, a strong discipline and impulse control.
You're so right. I mean, I'm now imagining growing up in a society, as a teenager, and with the social media, it would be a nightmare. Actually, I would be scared, just being confronted. And I know the effect it has on. In the way you just described it, us being confronted on social media with such impulses, and we see others have more fun, hang out with cooler people, and we sort of the envy, and we want to do it just like them. Huh? They are traveling to all the cool location. They're having such a wonderful life, and then you get miserable as a consequence. And sort of this has to do, and with a lack of self-control among the young people, that is affecting them even more strongly than it is in adults. But it's already extremely strong in adults, and sort of to be able to deal with that emotional influence which are being generated by social media is really a challenging issue. In order to actually sort of be able to distinguish between what are your core interests, something which you really subscribe to, and what is being told to you by social media. And not to be actually to give in what social media sort of tells you and sort of say, now everyone's doing it, you should do it, and so you give in, you suddenly realize that's not really what makes you happy.
And it's something that I need to keep reminding myself of as well. One of the things that I found really useful, and I need to remind myself to do this a lot, and that is just to be comfortable with being uncomfortable or even bored for a while, right? So I don't just, whenever I feel a little tinge of boredom, I instantly jump on my phone and look at something just to give me some form of emotional sort of arousal, like get pissed off at something or get really happy because of something. My football team won, yes, or my football team lost, oh no, or there's some bad political occurrence somewhere in the world, oh that's terrible. I mean, yes, of course there's horrible things in the world, we should be concerned about these sorts of things, but they shouldn't dominate our attention so much that we become impulsive. Exactly. In the way that we sort of engage with these issues, because actually, it looks like the way that people are engaging with politics is very polar and very impulsive in a sense.
Absolutely.
It's not as well considered as I would have hoped in this in this world of there's lots of information out there. There's lots of good quality information, but there's also a lot of distortion.
Polarization is really terrible, and we see that. I mean, it used to be global warming. Now there are different issues, and everyone suddenly it's the same type of polarization. There's a clear good and evil, and things are much more nuanced, and one needs to be. And I'm actually that's going to be a little chapter in my forthcoming book. It's about uncanceling cancel culture. Right. Where I'm saying, it is in order to undermine, actually, sort of to go against that polarization. So uncanceling cancel culture stands for, in a way, so there are we see sort of the exaggerated, excessive version of cancel culture. They do exist. And that's why, as a consequence...
I see it on the news all the time, right?
All the time.
It's like governments are sort of cracking down on free speech right now. Exactly. in nations that have been sort of the whole premise is free speech. Exactly. The whole constitution is deeply embedded. It's got free speech. I think the Second Amendment, whatever it is. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
And so but then it often swings back to a very conservative approach, like to a fundamentalist conservative, maybe religious approach as an alternative, which is, as problematic, as totalitarian. And in that respect, I stress on canceling cancel culture. I am against the attempts to cancel culture to move towards such an essentialist, paternalistic approach. There are some really good intentions behind cancel culture if they criticize the universal validity of some understandings. So I'm partially defending it, but partially defending the cancel culture, but at the same time, and that's why the notion of uncanceling cancel culture is ambiguous. I'm also, saying there are too many excessive notions of cancel culture which strongly need to be attacked, which strongly need to be criticized, where basically suddenly, because the same essentialist totalitarian criticism which they criticize, they are now applying themselves, and now the rich white man in general becomes the enemy just by being the rich white man, and without any nuanced situation about the context. And sort of one example which I like to highlight here, or which I like to highlight in that specific circumstance, is sort of the way how Woody Allen has been dealt with. For example, with respect to, he's been cancelled because of his relationship with Previn. Previn is sort of the adopted daughter of his former partner. They were together. The daughter grew up actually she was an adopted daughter of the partner. They were never married. she grew up as part of the family, so he was quasi the father, and then the daughter eventually, well, she left for college, and sort of Woody Allen fell in love, and Brevin, they fell in love with one another, and they started dating at the first year of her college. So she was an adult, a competent adult. She was above the age of 18 when they started dating. But this is from a cancel culture perspective. What happened here was, and someone who grew up as part of the family sort of cannot actually, because of the power difference, financial difference, reputation difference, family hierarchy, which had happened before, because of that hierarchical difference, one cannot take the yes of the younger, of the less famous, of the less rich person seriously. So it must have been abuse which had happened, which Woody Allen did with respect to Brevin. So that's an abusive, toxic relationship which had happened. What we can see, they are now together for more than for more than 25 years. They are married. They are still married. They seem to be like an example, maybe, of a perfect relationship. But they still cancel Woody. They still cancel Woody Allen as a consequence of that type of toxic. And that's one of the examples which clearly shows that, the problems with one of the excessive applications of cancel culture. So because hierarchy, because power is perspectival, it is not so clear who's actually having the role of power in such a relationship. It might be mutually shared. But in this respect, so there's a strong, they've been together for many decades. It clear as not, it might be the best example of a non-toxic relationship ever, but he's been strongly cancelled as a consequence of that. And that's just one of the examples, besides many others, where I say, no, we desperately need to move away from excessive notions of cancellation, which is particularly strong actually in academia, unfortunately, and I must acknowledge that. But the swing back towards like a Trumpian response is not the appropriate response either, or to an excessive conservative response, because the initial motivation to criticize these totalitarian hierarchies was actually very sensible, was very meaningful. And so that's why I want to apply a much more nuanced, non-polar response to such issues. And that's why I capture that in the phrase of uncanceling cancel culture.
Cool, yes. Now, I did notice, like, in another discussion you spoke about your metaphysics, in a sense. Like, you think that you're non-dualist. It seems like you're a physicalist. You think that the universe is just physics and things like that. So I found that interesting. It seems like you have a naturalistic view of the universe and a skeptical of the mystical, religious, or dualistic views. And you also sort of kick back against the use of the term immortality, because you're quite literally saying, well, immortals can't exist if we don't live in an immortal universe. So I think I'm with you there, in the sense that I think I lean a materialist. I lean a physical realist, in a sense. So, well, maybe I'm projecting, but anyway, is this your metaphysics? How would you describe the way that you lean metaphysically?
Actually, it goes back, sort of these engagements already go back to a book I published in 1999. It's called Metaphysics Without Truths, on the importance of consistency within Nietzsche's philosophy. So your summary was, it was a very good summary actually. But metaphysics not in the sense of a dualist understanding of the world, but clearly of a non-dualist ontology of permanent becoming. But in the end, what I tried to highlight, and that was basically a response to what happened in the Enlightenment. On the one hand, people responded, it became naturalist. On the other hand, people concentrated on perspectivism, that everything's interpretation, that like a postmodern approach. And I say, and sort of what I'm showing in this book is actually, well, I'm actually both. I think sort of the ontology of permanent becoming actually demands that it's no longer possible to make a strong truth claim which corresponds to reality, because truth permanently is in the process of becoming. So there cannot be any stability to which the words can actually correspond to. So perspectivism, that in the end...
Well, the cosmological constants seem pretty stable.
You know, the thing is, it's a way
But
about
yes.
where do you find sort of the truths to which your words can correspond to. And the traditional correspondent theory, they were like an immaterial realm where you actually had the truth as existing. But so once you have any word...
Platonic realm.
Yeah, Platonic realm. And so any word in a world of change basically cannot directly correspond to anything, because the things in the world are becoming. So in the end, it comes down to an interpretation. But interpretation doesn't mean it's false, but merely that it can be false. So perspectivism is actually best explained on the basis of such a dynamic naturalist understanding of the world. But perspectivism also implies that the world, or renders it plausible that the world is a process in becoming. So basically the two ends in 20th century philosophy which unfolded, on the one hand like the naturalists, on the other hand the postmoderns, with everything. I think they actually both two ends of the same development of spectrum, and I think they're perfectly correct both, because like perspectivism follows in the end on the basis of a naturalism. What follows is a perspectivism, but perspectivism can best be explained on the basis of a naturalist ontology of becoming. And so in the end, but when we come about, and as a consequence of that understanding, when we talk about morals, norms, politics, values, then, you know, there is no longer any realm to which they can correspond to either. So what we end up is sort of, they end up being fictions on the base which are rooted in human drives and desires and longings. So we end up in an ethical fictionalism. That's how I would, ontologically I would say, no, it's an ontology of permanent becoming which renders plausible perspectivism, which again leads to ontology of becoming, and ethically in the end, I'm a fictionalist. But fictionalists, there are some fictions, right now, which are part of our cultural tradition, which are more firmly rooted than others. And I'm very happy that most people nowadays share that, negative freedom is a wonderful achievement, And I'm strongly advertising. I'm advertising for it. I'm defending it, even though I'm aware that in the end, given a different social context, I might have come up with I might have cherished completely different norms and values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, connecting your this metaphysics. So, you don't think there's any stance-independent truths? You don't think that there's anything static? Everything is just, truth is dynamic and it's on the move. It's always on the go. How are you going to develop policies if you were to develop a form of transhumanism that can last, right? If the truths which they're founded on are in constant states of flux. So
I think it is an advantage. It's also a practical advantage once you encounter, you deal with members of a different. With the Chinese government, you no longer have that colonial stance. We know much better than what is in you. It's more, you already respect the partner better. You can still subscribe to your values and norms, but it's more respect with the other side you're talking about. So, and that is being, and sort of the recognition, the respect for the other is usually being cherished by members who share a completely different culture and background. But that doesn't mean, I strongly hold on, like negative freedom as a wonderful achievement. I strongly share the preference of, liberalism, democracy, autonomy. And that means also in the end, no, if in doubt, I need to step in, I need to do something about it. Even though I might know, if a certain group thinks burning 12-year-old girls as witches is justified from their understanding, I might say, well, ontologically, who knows who's right? But I would say no. I've got my values and norms, and I know sort of legally it's also wrong in the countries where these things still occur, like in Nigeria. So I would, tell the police to go there, do something against that. If possible, I would directly intervene in such a situation because I cherish, I do
You as
think.
an individual, but what if we're talking about how to deal with populations at a governing level? Like if you had it, like if you have a philosophy that can be instituted to manage people across, different sort of borders of suburbs or whatever, you got a whole nation underneath. How would you form these?
No, the thing is, it's sort of initially it's trying, because they might be right. I would firstly try to convince. Enter into a dialogue, and then you need to see how far that goes, and how far is the system rooted in something which is it actually possible for the people in the system to express their interest, or is the entire system merely based upon oppressive forces? So it is not so clear cut, but
dogs can't express their interest in the same ways that humans can, or right? But you don't want to see people dousing the dog in gasoline or kicking them. That would be just horrible. So usually, what people do is when they see people being cruel to animals like dogs, they'll get angry.
Exactly.
I think rightly so, right? But do you think there could be actually in history, there used to be public sort of cat burnings. They used to burn cats, right? In fact, there was another practice where they used to nail cats to a tree, still alive, and then people would headbutt them to death. And that was kind of like whoever could kill the cat first by headbutting them would win. This was sport.
Still happens.
Humans used to. It still happens.
Not that specific kind of, but other like cockfights and so on. You can see
cockfights. That's the modern day.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. But they're not. Yes, it's quite. That I don't know if it's as bad. It like the nailing a cat to a tree or burning cats alive or dogs alive, or there's another one where pigs were let run in a pen, and then somebody was would chase them and just whack them with a bat or something, and that was a sport, right? And we don't do that anymore. I think that's moral progress.
And I would say, I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of not doing these direct harm, but I wouldn't call it as a necessary. I would call it moral progress from my perspective. I wouldn't call it moral progress from an absolute perspective. But I would still do my best in order to stop these things from happening. You see?
Right. Okay. So without these stance-independent truths, then about morality, or you could even say there might not be stance-independent truths about epistemics. We might favour inference to the best explanation. We might favour logical deduction. We might favour abduction. Things like that. But if somebody were to pull out a crystal ball and started saying, okay, well, if you don't sell your house within the next 24 hours, lightning will strike it and you'll be burnt alive, how much credence are you going to give the person with the crystal ball? Not that much. Or somebody with some divining rods, right? Not that much. But there's good reasons why you won't.
But the thing is, so there's a difference between... there's a difference between this perspective as it applies to metaphysical, to essentialist insights about the world. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between essentialist insights or foundational insights and scientific insights. So scientific insights are rooted in principle of induction. You repeat certain things, and even if you're a perspectivist, that doesn't mean you have to be a skeptic about the sciences. Anyone who says the sciences clearly work, and if you doubt that the sciences, you should, shouldn't go into a plane in the first place. Anyone who doubts the relevance of the sciences and takes a plane is just utterly stupid, is committing a performative self-contradiction. So now, of course, the sciences work based on the principle of the induction. You repeat it often. Sometimes it doesn't work, then you need to adopt the science. And that is the decisive insight. Sometimes it doesn't work, then you need to adapt. But the important case why I distinguish scientific judgments from let's say, essentialist metaphysical and ontological judgments are, in the sciences they don't tell us, is the world in the end monads? Is it material? Is it psychophysiological? Is it, that's not what the sciences can tell us. The sciences tell us, make us certain predictions in the world we're living in, and it usually works, and it's wonderful, and I strongly defend the relevance of the sciences. But whether there's a God or not, I don't know. The sciences cannot tell us that. These are not.
It can't tell you anything about something it can't measure.
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly.
Now, if you define something that can't be measured, and that's one of the properties, then hey, you've just defined something that can't be disproven.
Exactly.
So if it's not falsifiable, if you've got a hypothesis that doesn't have any form of falsification criteria, then it's not really scientific according to Popper.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly, but these are usually the issues which philosophers address, from God, immortality of the soul, or like the free will, and these are not issues which can be disproven in the materials world. Neither of them make any sense, in a simple-minded understanding, at least. You cannot, once you think about the world of cause and effect, free will is not even conceptualizable. But that's why when I talk about perspectivism, I only talk about essentialists like philosophical judgment. I'm not talking about scientific judgment. I'm strong defender of the sciences, and I'm relying on conventional medicine. Praying to a certain Indian goddess. It's just, if you want to get cured from a disease, it might work in 5% of the cases. But if you rely on conventional medicine, it usually works in 95% of the cases. It really makes sense to rely on conventional medicine. But that's a different judgment to when. To when I say underlying religious understanding, and if like in a conventional medicine, someone would say, which wouldn't be appropriate either, but that there's no God on the basis of the sciences, but there's a Shitala Diva, a certain Indian goddess exists, then I may say, well, on a perspectival philosophical understanding, it might be true that it might be the case that Shitala Diva actually exists. I cannot make a foundational judgment on that issue. I can make a judgment what works when it comes to curing a specific disease, and that's why I do strongly rely on scientific judgments and engineering insights. But when it comes to anything which is sort of dealing with the non-empirical, then we need to apply perspectivism.
Right. So you've got the ontology, you've got the scientific, the epistemic, which I think science and epistemic, there's a lot of good sort of methods of reasoning that go into, validating evidence and observation, all that sort of stuff. But then there's the normative. Now, the normative, like you can have scientific norms, like high trust in in empirical method, in the empirical method, and some of the reasonings around falsification, some of the reasonings around trusting certain scientific programs if they're like progressive, losing trust in scientific research programs if they're degenerative, like they have got no confirming evidence for such a long period of time. Every time they get debunked, they just say, oh no, it was an auxiliary hypothesis that got debunked, not my core sort of theory or anything like that. There's all these sort of really contortionist gymnastic scientific sort of hypotheses out there that always resist falsification one way or the other. Yes. Now, but then there's the moral, right? What I'd say is that certain things like suffering is like the is the like inherently bad. It's intrinsically a bad thing. There can be circumstances where suffering works out for the good, but suffering where all things are equal, ceteris paribus, I'd say is bad. And pleasure or well-being, ceteris paribus, all things considered, all things being equal, is generally good, right? Now, is from ought. I think Hume said that you cannot derive an is directly from an ought, but he said you can explain. Sorry, you can't. Yeah, you can't get an ought from an is, but you can explain an ought from an is if you did proper reasoning. So there's got to be some sort of reasoning, normative bridge work going on. Where do you sit? Do you think suffering is inherently bad? Do you think pleasure is inherently good? Do you think reasons are real? Do you think suffering is real?
Suffering is, I would say we live. Dukkha is a basic conditio humana, a human condition. As long as we live, as long as we have an ego which wants, which desires, which longs for something, then we necessarily basically have to suffer in order to reach.
So it's real.
It is something real, yes, and I would.
Right. Is pleasure real? Is the other side of the hedonic spectrum real?
Yes, but the thing is, I'm not. That's why I'm not. I don't say it's either bad or it's good. So it's a basic human condition, and very often if you just if you have a drink every day, it might be pleasurable. Then and you get liver cancer in the future. Then you shows the pleasure at the moment might actually lead to a lot of pain in the future. And there are many other examples where actually like taking care of oneself in the present, which might be extremely painful. You're very organized. You write. I'm writing my 10th book now. You're very structured, and it's a lot of painful enterprise. But once the book is out, I'm very happy about that. It gives me a lot of satisfaction and contentment, even though it's a lot of sacrifice in my entire life, which I've had. Imagine staying in, doing all the readings, doing all the doing the publications, and it's teaching and developing that further. And the philosophy is a very competitive field. It's a very hard and I've sacrificed so much in my entire life. People wouldn't even believe. But then in the end, you get received, you get invited, things work out, and it's really, it was worth it. And I really cherish all the sacrifices I've underdone, but they've been extremely painful. But in the end, so that's why I'm saying, I'm not so easily like pain is bad, pleasure is good. It's much more complex with respect.
Yeah. That's why I sort of bracket the and qualify with all things equal, right? So in isolation, if suffering were there and there was no future benefit, no present benefit, it was just suffering and that's all there was to it, then I'd say that's bad. It expresses itself in the feeling, in the actual the experience as badness. It doesn't require rationality to me. It doesn't require, is that good? The sort of evaluative criteria that, the evaluative process that humans go through when thinking about things isn't required to know that suffering is bad or to experience it as inherently bad. An animal could experience something like suffering as inherently bad. For instance, I got a cracked heel because one of my heels has gotten really dry and I didn't moisturize it. And now, I put tea tree oil in it and it stings. But I know I should do that because of the benefit of helping the healing process, right? But if I wouldn't just do that for the sake of it, because it's actually quite painful. There's a lot of nerves in your feet, right? You don't pull your teeth out just for the sake of just the experience of it. You're not going to drive a rusty nail into your eyeball. Now, the reason why is because there's an inherent badness to it, and I think,
I'll just stop there. Some like the smell of tea tree oil. They you come into the room and they've got a completely different preference concerning smells, and some are.
You don't like tea tree oil.
I've got an
it's got
ambiguous
a very
relationship to
medicinal
the
smell.
vitriol. So, but and some are psychological masochists who love to be humiliated, and they get their kicks out of that humiliation, and which might even also be painful for them, but it still at the same time gives them a lot of pleasure pains as a consequence. So that's why it's much more complex and nuanced when we need to look at the specific examples.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess like if you could grow like and become a better human being, more of what you would like to be, through a process that didn't require as much pain and dread as you might have had to endure in the Middle Ages, it seems like you'd prefer to be in a world where achieving a better version of yourself can be done in a way which doesn't involve much more suffering. Like in order to become the philosopher that you are now, you would have had to hide all these books from the papacy and the local priests, or you might be sort of burnt. You might, or you might be sort of drawn and quartered. You might be you might have been sort of mistaken for a wizard of a local sort of druids circle, and you would have been sort of either executed in a very nasty way.
I've just been to a church where I saw all the various methods of torture from the past. Really brutal.
Oh,
like
yeah,
biting
yeah,
people in 4 parts and being burned alive.
yeah. That's being drawn and quartered. Racked. Yeah, have you heard of the expression "racked with guilt" or "racked with pain"? That came from being actually drawn, like put on a rack and being stretched, so that your joints would pop out, and
The problem with
we've
that,
never had to experience that, right? I'm pretty glad.
the problem with that, I mean, close to here was like I live close to the Campo dei Fiori, where Giordano Bruno was burned in the center.
Oh, really? Giordano Bruno for expressing
Exactly.
a view about like this
Philosophical understanding.
where the Earth was. Yeah, right. Yeah. So he had like an early proto-scientist guy, right? He was burnt at the stake for this, wasn't he?
Yeah. And the problem with sort of your suggesting is basically, well, there's still a competitive enterprise. So if I wouldn't have worked and sacrificed so much, then others, others would have done and could have received it by means of technological, genetic, and others would have done the same. But it's always like reception and developing something. There's a competitive enterprise, and others might then reach something right in insight. So there is. And it might simply not work that easily to reach specific goals. It depends on which goals you have in mind. If it's just a certain capacity which you develop in order to have the capacity, or whether it's something which plays a role with respect to other people. And then, and this is often the case. And in that case, you always need to do a little bit more than the others. But if you need to do a little bit more, it doesn't matter what the preconditions might be more developed nowadays than they were like 500 years ago. But sort of the effort you need to put in is still a lot in order to be in a competitive environment. So you still need to do all the working and stress and isolation and dedication and pain to inflict upon yourself and sacrifice in order to get what you want to get. That's why I don't think it makes a big difference actually in these circumstances. So the dedication, if you want to achieve grandezza, greatness, if you want to achieve something, you don't get it without the pain. You don't just travel around the world, have a great time and traveling in hedonist enterprises, live like techno Thailand tantra and this is what, but this is what a lot of...
Yeah. So you might need to undergo some kind of suffering, some kind of like discomfort, but there are levels of discomfort which we are unfamiliar with in the 21st century that our ancestors probably had to deal with,
Of
like
course.
starvation, quite a
Exactly.
lot.
Exactly.
That I'm kind of happy not to have to undergo that level of suffering. However, the required sort of as a human, like the required sort of overcoming myself, because, lifting weights occasionally or going for walks and, overcoming boredom and all that sort of stuff, and putting my head down and reading and researching consistently requires effort, which requires a bit of discomfort. It's not the same level of discomfort as I believe.
I absolutely agree. This is so. It really makes a difference if you've got a life expectancy of 40 years or of 80 years. If if you have clean water, if you've got a fridge. Which stores like the milk, if you're ill, you can take antibiotics. This is just wonderful. Anesthetics if you're in pain. Vaccinations are just absolutely spectacular. But then on that basis, it is, and this is why I'm sort of, that is an element which I'm very critical of, when you end up sort of in a state and then you think, no, it's all just fun and pleasure and it's not working around, and you embrace what I said, sort of, techno, Thailand, tantra, tattoos, travel the world just to get your kicks in the moment for the time being, without, putting effort, realizing that in order to achieve something important, you really need to put effort. It is not fun. You need to place value on yourself, which is a lot of hard work. But you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you put the effort in. But unfortunately, FOMO, the fear of missing out, is so strong in a hedonist culture, and I see that a lot in the American context, and I find that really problematic. And that's being affirmed by quite a few classic transhumanists as well. And that's why I think, I don't think it actually increases the quality of living a good life. I do stick to virtues, to having trust in people, to having something reliable, to cherishing, to have rock solid bones. You can rely on other people. If someone else is suddenly, I'm no longer in the mood of hanging out with that person, of that being my partner, I just fly to the next one and have fun there. And this is not the basis for. And this is, I'm saying, this is my personal confession. These are my values I subscribe to. Maybe someone can actually have fun living like that, but or have a good life. I doubt it, personally, and I would strongly say, you need some virtues. You need sort of to put effort in. That's why sort of the greatness, develop something, work on something. Be a good tennis player or be a good writer. Then be refined in your taste, in what you prefer, not something, the more refined, the more special it is, and then actually stick to, that's why I sort of stick to it, the impulse control. And in the end, it's also a matter, you need to have others to rely on, and you cannot be happy by yourself, the social element. That's why the trust is so absolutely fundamental. Probably the most, I think one needs an entire book just on trust, because it's so fundamental for the quality of life.
So the Euro-Transhumanism, now I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but you said that you're in favor of pluralism. Now, do you think Euro-Transhumanism is in favor of pluralism?
Exactly, yeah. So that's why I sort of did the example from early on, where I say, with the example also of competent adults making a judgment, coming to an agreement, taking seriously what competent adults enter into by means of a contract. You need to take that seriously. That was the case with Brevin, who was like in the first year of her college, and Woody Allen, who was like 40 years or senior or so. And so it doesn't matter whether it's then a non-binary people entering into relationship, if it's a polyamorous agreement, or whether it is a same-sex couple who enters into a partnership. That's why it is the great diversity, but it needs to be rooted in like that autonomous decision among competent adults who enter into a contract. And then there are no boundaries. There are no limitations, as long as no other other person directly gets harmed from that. And that's why it is open up to the great plurality of different lifestyles, and not even if there is a big hierarchy of powers is given, as in critical posthumanists, they would criticize it. Not even in that case, no. That doesn't undermine the possibility of saying yes within such a situation. And we clearly is a movement away from sort of the natural law, religious conservatism, obviously, where it says, the eyes are there for seeing, the nose for smelling, and the genitals for reproduction. You should only have sex if there's a possibility of having offspring. This is the traditional Catholic natural law tradition, which is it's very critical of obviously from that perspective. And so the central aspect is sort of the autonomy among competent adults who enter an agreement, and being able to say yes is not being undermined by hierarchical structures, because hierarchies, the power, the estimation, the power judgments are perspectival, and it's always unclear who actually is in a state of power. And we need to take seriously the judgments once they come from a competent adult. And that's why it's in the interest. It's a great plurality which basically gets covered on such an understanding. And that's why morphological freedom is also a central element which is being affirmed in Eurotranshumanism.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Right. So I think that pluralism is great, as an input layer to grab values and evaluate them. Though often people's values, they do disagree with each other. So there's got to be some way to adjudicate between where there are strong conflicts between these values. If everybody's got to live with each other, that some values are going to be incompatible. If somebody wants to be slave owners, well, how does that work in a society where they look down on slavery, and who wants to be the slaves anyway, right? If one person values tyranny and everybody else values a relative equality, and everybody has an opportunity and they don't need to be sort of enslaved, then I think there's got to be some sort of layer of adjudication. What values surface to the top? What values are emphasized? And this can't just be another layer of pluralism.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. So the first example with slavery is problematic because once you have obviously personhood, respect for personhood already implies that there are no slaves. There cannot be slaves when as long as there is a competent adult that's a human and high capacity of suffering, they would need to be recognized as a person. So there are no slaves. From the moral status of being a slave. But of course they need to be other elements as well, and sort of for policy making, for example. That's why I say
some people have differences of opinion on what counts as a person. Now back in the day,
course, that's a tricky tricky issue.
People who were the slaves often weren't treated or considered as persons. Now women weren't considered as full persons, and therefore didn't have the ability to vote. They didn't have the same rights as men did. So there's these values that we have today in the modern world, right? Now, if most of the population suddenly, for some reason went sort of old-fashioned, traditional, what should we do? I mean, should we just
we need to advertise.
Let's just say that was the most. Let's just say they won by 51%. Yeah. The women can't vote tribe, and we should have slaves tribe. Do you think that should be allowed? Right.
Oh, that's why sort of a liberal democratic society needs to take sort of the rootedness already in its constitution. In any attempt which undermines already the liberal democratic structures need to be avoided. And here the question then is, what are the problematic cases? There are always some problematic cases, and that when does personhood start? Obviously, even if it's related to the capacity of suffering, one could say, well, does a fetus suffer? You could actually fetus who's sort of moving as if it was suffering, but it doesn't seem to have consciousness, because consciousness is usually an afterbirth phenomena. So maybe then there's a possibility of non-conscious suffering, and so I would there's non-conscious suffering, and there are quite a few people who make such a suggestion. And then there are levels and tendencies of suffering. Maybe you need a fully developed brain actually in order to be fully capable of suffering. And there are various things which could be considered in such circumstances. But we luckily have some kind of culturally embedded agreements And this cultural embeddedness is relevant. It's not always, it is and it shouldn't always be decisive in the same way as tradition is and shouldn't be decisive. But one could consider, let's say, the case of, male circumcision. Male circumcision is an irreversible direct harm being done to another person. There's something's being chopped off and there's a reduced likelihood of reduced sensibility which occurs, and so but it's a religious obligation in Judaism and the Islam at different stages in their development. So here, one of the counter arguments is also it's also about religious freedom, which needs to be considered. But in the end, it is a direct harm being done to another person. And normally it's also the government's duty to protect person from direct bodily harm. So how can that be justified? And that's a very intriguing and a very good argument. However, if this argument was made in Germany, then it becomes problematic, because in Germany, with a history of anti-Semitism and basically undermining the possibility of living your Jewish faith, this is not a suggestion within this cultural embeddedness can make sense or is a plausible, is a meaningful suggestion. If you made the same kind of suggestion in Iceland or Denmark, which has a completely different historical, then it actually becomes a very interesting argument. So that's why I'm saying I'm not giving you specific answers to such issues, because the cultural embeddedness needs to be, and that's a hermeneutic approach, and the cultural embeddedness needs to be taken into consideration. I would, if I reflect upon that issue, a direct, irreversible, direct bodily harm is really something morally problematic. However, but I wouldn't make it strong as in the context of within Germany, because of that history of the Third Reich. And so this is why cultural embeddedness is something, when we come to direct decision-making processes, really needs to be taken into consideration in the same way as scientific evidence is important. So that if there's something like, if there's the evidence of 1 in 200,000 people basically who might be young and who wouldn't normally die from the disease, but there's a good chance that 1 in 200,000 people actually dies from the vaccinations, then it becomes problematic to legally enforce a specific vaccination, because it has consequences. Basically 1 in 200,000 people is being sacrificed who probably wouldn't normally die as a consequence of the disease, but would die as a consequence of the vaccination. So I'm strongly in favor of vaccination, so don't get me wrong, but we need to make sure that as a consequence of the vaccination, really we can exclude the possibility of a direct death being related. We can allow significant, some harms, we can allow some side effects which have to do with vaccinations. When it comes to the issue of dying...
This is all about the individual freedom versus the value of the collective. Exactly. When there's enough people who are vectors for disease, then more people suffer. But sometimes, as a more direct result of the vaccination, people have health problems. Maybe even they die. I don't know too much about the details there. So can we do our own thing and reject vaccinations per se? If there are social costs to the collective by doing so, should we allow people to run roughshod over others in order to achieve marginal gains? So they think they don't want the vaccination, it's a pinprick, they don't like it, they don't want that 1 in 200,000 chance of dying, but they and their family and their children are just going to be potentially spreading infectious disease in their workplace, in their schools, in their kindergartens, in the shopping mall, in the supermarket, on public transport. What's the right thing to do?
And I would here really make a distinction between if there's a chance of dying, or if it is just a significant, a chance of a significant side effect. Once there is a chance of dying, and this is actually what happened during the COVID vaccination as well, because it became out, there was some evidence that one specific vaccine actually was correlated, had a strong correlation to death directly being brought about as a consequence of the vaccination. It was like 1 in 200,000. And as a consequence, it was
AstraZeneca?
It was AstraZeneca, yeah. And at the consequence, basically, people stopped being vaccinated with AstraZeneca. But with Pfizer, this was never confirmed that the death was directly caused by the vaccination. There were side effects. There were like correlation because of old age and disease. There were other explanations. And then so to render something obligatory, I think it can be rendered obligatory once the issue really becomes a matter of life and death. I have strong hesitations. One mustn't risk one's own existence, one's life for the sake of everyone else. There should be the right to step out under such circumstances. But
think of what it would have been like as like you going to work as a laborer in a mine in order to put food on your family's table, or even earlier back, you were sort of an indentured servant, hauling large slabs of stone to make pyramids, or you were a warrior protecting the outskirts of your clan from marauding neighboring invaders. Would you just not go to work if there was like a 1 in 100 chance so you're going to die, right? But
right.
people had to do that.
And the same applies about like military service, obligatory military service. Once there's a risk of entering war and obviously the risk of dying for your country. So I'm in general, that's why I'm hesitant concerning obligatory military services. One should professionalize people who really want to take on their risk. But I'm aware, this is why whenever it comes to such issues, I stressed in the beginning, there is no perfect answer. They're always as good as it gets solutions. And we need to take, if there's an increased risk of a military conflict, then it can be the right thing to render military service obligatory with all the implications which follow from that, and the risk of being willing to die. If the situation is so bad that basically without a vaccination, like there's a 30% death rate, then one needs to take the chance of dying oneself.
When leadership positions, you're making triage decisions, either with you're the leadership of your own mind, you're the leadership of your own person. So you're triaging on your own behalf, but also when you're a leader of other people, or you're setting policies, you're doing triages, in anticipatory triages, right? You don't know who's going to be at the pointy end of the spear. You don't know who's going to survive based on some of these policies decisions, but they often need to be decisive. In real time strategizing, where you need to make moral decisions then and there without hesitation. What do you do? Right? Is there a set of principles you abide by, or what do you do?
Yeah, in the case of a conflict, so these are always as good as it gets. There is no, you're getting your hands dirty in some way. We need to be very pragmatic here. So, however, and you're asking for a more decisive hierarchy of criterion. And I think sort of one of the central achievement is actually, it is negative freedom, which is an outgrowth of the Enlightenment, as the absence of constraint, of the individual having the right to making a decision for him or herself concerning which lifestyle they want to subscribe to. But as part of the freedom of the achievement, it is not just the absence of constraint making a decision. There are other elements which also, and the negative freedom unfolds itself by means of morphological freedom, by means of educative freedom, by means of reproductive freedom. But it also has further elements. Freedom is not just negative freedom; it also implies, having a place to stay, having something to eat, being healthy, being educated, having some concern even for universal justice, taking others globally into consideration, other people, I would even say. So that's why there's a hierarchy of different elements of freedom which need to be developed. based on that, what I've been defending, I actually do think sort of there's sort of negative freedom is really fundamental, but it does come along with you need to be alive, you need to have something to eat in order to for negative freedom to and you need to be healthy. That's why these things do come together and are fundamental and need to be considered. So freedom is actually my guiding star, is my but freedom is not just a simple-minded negative freedom. Some other elements do come in. And that's why also the focus on health and the relevance of an increased health span.
Yeah. So all these trade-offs, like, we've mentioned freedom versus security and transparency. Now, we've talked about tradition, like, traditional values versus values of progress. What are your thoughts on James Hughes's techno-progressive stance? Do you agree with some of those elements, or do you disagree with some others?
I'm more liberal than he is. He's got I'm very sympathetic to quite a few elements. But I think he's more care for the community than what I would have. Because I think sort of the negative freedom element, the absence of constraint, is really is a strong achievement that others cannot tell you, force you to pay money for others' lifestyles, that can stop you from making decisions. And his understanding is much more firmly rooted in actually uplifting things to even the financial element of many people on a more equal rating, where I say, what is sufficient is what I would regard as sufficient would be more related to with having, if you're alive and you are healthy, have a place to live, something to eat, and maybe giving some kind of education, and that's I do think that's why I do like the German actually system, is to say it's basically free. Everyone could in the end sort of get a university, work themselves out. Living is very cheap too, and so on. And you have a lot of potential without necessarily without necessarily increasing the taxes so much that basically it becomes impossible to be a billionaire. So that seems to go too far. You need to reward the ones who actually put the effort in and create something special. And the people who created the BioNTech vaccine, they had their origin, they had a Turkish origin. They put a lot of effort and they founded an amazing company, and they realized within like a couple of months a vaccine which no one else in the world deserved to realize. And they saved millions of people's lives as a consequence of that. And there were other companies in Germany actually as well who used the same kind of technique. They also used for decades, did research for decades in order to realize something. But the vaccination, and many invested in that company too. But in the end, their vaccine had a success rate of 30%. 40%. It was far too low that the entire, even though they had also done decades of research in that specific technology, they failed. The entire company went bankrupt. So it's not guaranteed the success. So that's why it's a very risky enterprise. And so once you manage to do so, and this couple actually managed to realize something actually absolutely extraordinary, well, they deserve to be billionaires, multi-billionaires. And that needs to be taken into consideration, because it was a lot of preparation, and then in the times of the crisis, they managed to get the best people in the world, researchers and the biotechnologists in the world together in order to work day and night to realize something where the outcome is not even guaranteed, because the others did the same but others did the same thing, but they failed. So it's a lot about taking on the risk, and so that's why one needs to appropriately consider also the achievements which putting in the risk and doing a lot of work and having the financial benefits from doing so, and not basically then leading that to And the same applies to, to their offspring, to their heirs. Then they didn't spend the money or give it all away. Then they may have saved it up in order for the offspring. And so that also applies. So this needs to be that is a stabilizing factor of a society in order not to have too high taxes on that specific issues. Because here, for example, it doesn't promote this hedonist lifestyle. You have it, you need to spend it fast, otherwise the state's going to take it away. And that promotes some stabilizing factor, and it's in the interest of a political system to have these stabilizing factors, to have a family, to have like a marriage, a partner, and that's why it's these are elements which are stabilizing in the interest of. That's why it makes sense for a political system to actually promote them, because the political system wants to continue to exist in the future too. In the same way as I think individually we don't have a...
Yeah, sometimes what people do, though, isn't actually develop good products or good services or good science. They try and change the playing field so that it unfairly betters their narrow interests, monopolization and all these sorts of things, all sorts of, sort of misinformation, disinformation campaigns, trying to convince people to be irrational in order to buy your products and all these sorts of things. We talked about this before, but when the selection pressures get influenced by people changing the landscape to heavily, as deeply favor their own interests, then that's different, because people are not getting rewarded for the actual value that they bring to society. That people are getting rewarded because they're rigging the game.
Misinformation is a problematic element, because that's got to do. So here you consciously, and that often happens with kind of advertisement, no? Or with like packaging. You package something that looks as big as it used to look before, and then you smallly write it's 90 gram instead of 100 gram. So these are here one does need to be careful that sort of a certain transparency is guaranteed with respect. So the policy making needs a certain kind of protection is relevant. Who try to benefit, who try to manipulate people, who spread misinformation, and because in the end, sort of our time is limited, and if we receive information, then not everyone can become an expert in each specific. Not everyone can become an expert in each specific field, and sort of you can't make research on everything. You basically you need to make a decision on as a competent adult, and so some help is needed in order to guarantee the transparency with respect to that specific field, that people without too much effort get the appropriate information in order to that misinformation and abuse or exploitation doesn't take place. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about like artificial intelligence a little bit. Hey, so you're against human misuse of AI. You think that that's a probable failure mode when AI is concerned. You're not so concerned about superintelligence coming along at all, but even if it does, it just wiping us out. But you're more concerned, as far as I understand from your previous conversations, that it worries you how dangerous people can now be with AI. I share this concern. People can use AI to do misinformation campaigns. They might be able to use AI to grow a virus in their backyard wet lab, and do sorts of all sorts of harmful terror tactics. So you think there's a lot of nasty human uses of AI that could occur well before we reach artificial superintelligence?
Absolutely, yeah. So the interaction or the incorporation of AI in order to use it in their own interest. Maybe someone says, no, we want to create a virus, super spreading airborne virus, which kills all people in like 6. It only like you feel the consequence in a year's time, and then it kills everyone within 24 hours. that's really tricky to deal with, and that's some of the scary elements which actually goes along with the use of AI, with the use of LLMs. I'm not. It's not about superintelligence or even artificial general intelligence, because I do sort of with what I identify with AGI and with superintelligence, also already with AGI. It means already has the same capacities as a human being. And so it also must be alive, it must have a consciousness, capacity of suffering, emotions, and so on. And the consequence also, the intentionality. Because I love the sunshine at the beach, and I enjoy when it's warm at the beach and smell the salty air, which I can experience there, I want to go to the beach. And if I realize I don't like the salty air there, then I change my mind, then I go into the wilderness, or I climb a mountain in order to get fresh air, which is on the top of a high mountain. So I change my direction, I adapt my goal, the goal for which I made. And this is so you need consciousness experience, you need then the intentionality to do something in order to actually be motivated to be alive and to be motivated to do something like that. And we're far away from that still with respect to artificial intelligence. And this is sort of how the notions of how I understand AGI and superintelligence. And that's why I think sort of a book like Superintelligence should be sold in the science fiction section. So now that's why I think, I'm not excluding the possibility, but so we're far away from sort of these kind of worries. We're still forcing, these are all varieties of weak AI we're confronted with. And they're extremely striking, and they're phenomenally, the capacities are absolutely extraordinary. But it's not the case that it says something by itself, it makes a decision. I want to, I don't like humans, I want to kill humans, or I want to put them into the zoo. But the interaction, the incorporation with humans, even programming something like, the will to survive into something. Then the issues do become already problematic. Even here, but it's even the computer viruses which we have right now, or the digital entities which we have now, they don't have a metabolism. And that's again another decisive difference. They don't have a way to sustain themselves by means of energy, by means of eating, drinking, and digesting, and to keep up the energy. And some would say, like Stephen Hawking, they are quasi alive because they're moving from one host to the next. But it's sort of the metabolism factor which still seems to be a different. And I'm not excluding
viruses, right?
Of computer viruses. So I'm not excluding them coming about eventually. But as we've seen life coming about from something non-organic. Organic entities came about on Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. 4.5 billion years the Earth came about, and about 3.5 billion years ago this first living entities come about. So it took about 1 billion years in a strange setting with lightning and fire and warm and heat and water and volcanoes, and that the initial living entities did came about, and probably lightning and something extraordinary happened. But we don't know exactly what happened. But then suddenly self-movement did occur. So from something inorganic, something organic did come about. And so it happened on a carbonate basis. And if it happened on a carbonate basis, in principle, it could happen on a silicon basis as well. But it took us 3.5 billion years to get to the capacities we're currently having. And so that's why I'm not... And of course, and that there's like the exponential growth and that's why at least I'm not thinking sort of it's not necessarily in 20 years' time that we will have to be confronted with superintelligence.
Okay.
Further development.
We don't know. I don't know. You might be wrong, right? You've got some credence that you're wrong.
Of course.
But let's just say in 5 to 10 years we do end up with AGI or some form of superintelligence, right? What policies that you're advocating for today, or what sort of general views about the world that you're advocating today, which are highly impactful, do you think you'll be would have been a mistake if AI just comes along? So you're not really concerned about doing AI safety research because you think it's far off. Is that correct?
No, safety research is important, but rather with respect to something like use of LLMs in order to which prompts can be asked in order to generate like a virus by means of for bioterrorism purposes or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, 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 yeah.
These,
So
these
so the sort of like yeah, okay. So when I should have prefaced it, super intelligence safety. Hmm.
Yes, I'm not so worried about that yet, and I've known quite a few people who experts in the field are very worried about that. But I don't. As I for the due to the reasons I mentioned before, I'm not that worried. But but at the same time, I would be saying no. If there was something, well, if there was something like that AGI to come about, like in a few decades. I don't know, what would stay because I would directly have to be confronted what it would be capable of doing, and that's it's so different from what we can imagine so far. It might be challenging. However, I would be open to the possibility that maybe something like I cherish like a liberalism, classic liberalism, liberal democracy, social democracy. That might have to be revised. It might be, given the capacities, a different structural system might be actually appropriate under such circumstances. But we need to see what's going to happen then and what the system will be like at that time. But that's why I'm saying, even what I really firmly hold on, like an ethics of liberal autonomy right now. Even that is up to disposal, is up to change, is subject to change given the appropriate circumstances and changing circumstances, because even that is a fiction created on the basis of the current scientific insights and cultural circumstances.
Right. So by the way, do you think that AI could be, well, if it's going to be more intelligent than humans, then obviously it's probably going to be a better reasoner than humans. It probably will be a better scientist than humans. Do you think it will be better at adjudicating moral issues? Can it be, in a sense, quote unquote, more moral than humans?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. So, with respect to morality, we've got so many different moralities.
Like let's just say it's adjudicating pluralism. It's trying to, let's just say pluralism is the input sort of filter, but then once you have incompatible sort of values within the sum of this extracted values across a population of humans. Extracted volitions, true, if you want to be if you want to incorporate SEV, then what's the policy? Do you think AI would be better at executing a policy that would be able to adjudicate across all these effectively?
If we have a defined criterion for what the better constitutes in, like if we say, we want to have let's say, a more stable society or a safe society, and look, here are the different views which basically which policies would have to be implemented in order to make the society a safe one. Then I think.
So you're saying the AI would be able to sort of extrapolate what the outcomes of weighting all the policies in a certain way would look like in 100 or 1,000 years. Here's what utopia looks like under these conditions. Here's what it might look like under these conditions. Here's the result of the other set of policies, which by the way ends up as a dystopia, and then feed it back to us in the form of multimedia, metrics like the amount of lives saved, quality adjusted life years, disability adjusted life years, length of life, and all this back to us today, and then get us to choose based on all these sort of dashboards, multimedia sort of simulations of futures under different sort of circumstances, and then we'd make a big choice. Is that Is that
That's
how you'd say it?
futurology, making it
Yeah.
the prediction about what the world like 30, 50, 100 years is like. I just, we wouldn't have, Nokia wouldn't have, in the year Apple came about, the iPhone came about, wouldn't have thought even that they could ever be beaten in the future. This is sort of the
This was a
capacities.
behemoth of a company, but a lot of science fiction writers did do a pretty good job.
I know. That's why it's so difficult, sort of things which
So
happen.
difficult. Do you think superintelligence would be worse at it than humans, or could be better?
I can't. I mean, the thing is, because I've got like doubts, even concerning the concept of superintelligence, it's difficult to imagine even that kind of concept of the superintelligence, what it
Yeah.
can do. But because it's such a complex, the world is such a complex system. Um, um, I'm definitely so. But once the system, because the superintelligence is itself part of the system about which it would have to make predictions, that what makes it particularly complex for prediction. If the system is a closed one, as in the case of a Go playing, chess playing, then obviously it is much better. Much better than a human in making the predictions. It's already getting much more complicated with respect to the arts. Because here is not such a clear set criterion for what is successful work of art, what resonates with the current times. And I think sort of with the field of arts, you can actually innovate. A lot of innovation can take place by means of artificial intelligence. So most artists eventually need to use artificial the innovation capacities, but sort of it is still the human initially triggering the prompt, saying this is what I want to do. Or at least so far it's also about choosing which type of response is the best one because it fits best the spirits of the time. So it can innovate immensely. So the AI presents a lot of different replies, but so far it is not yet possible to decide this is one seems to best fit the spirit of our times. But that might be something in the future which actually I could also be capable of doing. But then it's still sort of the prompt getting triggered in the first place, the idea what you want to, which would need intentionality, and that would need AGI and superintelligence. And so far I cannot conceptualize it, but as I said, I'm not excluding the possibility.
Cool. Look, all right, so we've covered a lot of ground. Is there any other things that, like, I haven't asked you, which you thought you should, that you'd like to bring up? I don't know, there's a lot we've covered. Let's see.
Yeah, there's a lot we covered. There was some people have wondered sort of in how far, why should we actually, I'm usually mentioning as Elon Musk as an example of a classic transhumanist.
Right.
And some people wonder, is that actually the case? And I know, same applies to Buterin, Vitalik Buterin and Peter Thiel. But, with the case of Musk, I know there is a close friendship, with members of the Future of Humanity Institute. They've been invited to islands, meetings where he simply met up with 50 people sharing secrets. And it stayed. And he was financially supporting the Future of Humanity Institute. And he propagated,
as well as the Future of Life Institute, right?
And the Future of Life as well. And so he presented simulation of many ideas in political circumstances which come from the transhumanist discourses. So, but because these people are also, the entrepreneurs are particularly sensitive to the labeling. That's why seems to be a hesitation, even though they themselves subscribe to it. Sort of they want to avoid a specific labeling because of the, let's say, problematic connotations such labels do have when it comes to public reception. So that would explain why they might not have expressed themselves as a person, as a transhumanist, as a person affirming X, while still in the policy making, in the things they have affirmed, in the financial investments or financial engagements they've made, it is clear that this is an understanding. What they're affirming with Peter Thiel is even more complex because of his affirmation of René Girard, the Catholic theologian, and he's having a very, very strange mixture of different enterprises, of different thoughts, which he's affirming. where many like Catholics, let's say in Europe, continental Europe, would say that's not really Catholic. But it's sort of, so that's why. But I would still know, given the implications, given their affirmations, given their personal connections, I would still label them as transhumanist. And there are different types of transhumanists. So as you know, it's rightly noted that sort of Musk is more on existential risk, like Bostrom, or Thiel is more on extending the health span, like the majority of transhumanists in general. And so I still regard it as appropriate, but one shouldn't regard, and this is something which many people unfortunately do, apply standards to entrepreneurs or even medics, which cannot be applied to them as philosophers, because they are no philosophers. There's a difference between non-experts making a judgment on the specific case than it is in experts in a specific field. And that's why, it's not only an expertise in performing an abortion. It's not only an expertise in programming an LLM. It is also an expertise in specific fields of philosophy, and sort of like in being an ethicist. And so making a judgment on an abortion, if it's being made by an expert in the field, by a philosopher, philosophical ethicist in the field, like Peter Singer, is a different judgment than when it was made by a gynecologist who's maybe have performed many abortions in the past, because they don't have the ones have beliefs, but the others have actually informed knowledge, informed information. They can make informed judgments, knowing the history of values, history of philosophy, the embeddedness. I just want there's such a widely shared tendency, anyone can be a philosopher, and I can guarantee you that's not the case. And in the same way as you need probably even more training as a philosopher than you do as a lawyer or a physician. If you see they're the brightest people in the world, in the US, studying philosophy. The dropout rate in philosophy is more than 90% in the United States. It is more than you find in medicine and in other fields, because they realize many people think it's just about sitting in the coffee bar, like sitting in a Paris coffee bar and smoking Gaulois and reading
Foucault.
Reading Foucault and uttering something meaningless or something poetically in the world, and that is not philosophy. You need a lot of training, a lot of dedication, a lot of hard work actually to get, and that's why I strongly want to defend, in particular, and I'm working a lot with entrepreneurs, computer scientists, and with and medics and there's such a widely shared understanding. So look, what you're doing in the end, I can do the same thing. No, and I can guarantee you that's not the case. You have got beliefs, but sort of there's a difference to making an informed judgment on a specific issue than it is if it was just done by a layperson in the end. And that's something I strongly want to uphold, the relevance and the training and the capacities, the expertise which goes along with actually being a philosopher, because that's widely underestimated.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, there's a lot of good philosophers. I've gravitated towards philosophy as I've gotten older. I didn't really study it, but I have really enjoyed it, and it brings a lot of meaning to my life, reading and the very considered views about the world. I've gotten to meet Peter Singer. He also lives in Melbourne a number of times. I've done a few interviews with him, recorded a few of his talks. I do really like his positions. I find them quite attractive. He's a moral realist. But anyway, let's not go there because we've already discussed that. But it has been really good talking to you this time. Great. Let's hope that it's not another 11 years until we get to do it again. Who knows? Maybe it'll be after the singularity. But yes, it's been great. What I'll do is I'll thank everybody for listening in, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. And Stefan, it's been awesome talking to you. I'll wrap this up here. I'll send you a link once I've finished it. But yeah, thanks so much for
It's
joining me
been
in
wonderful
this
talking to you.
interview.
You know, your interviews are really great, actually. So detailed. You take the time. It's such a nuanced understanding, well prepared. So it's been an enormous honor and pleasure for me talking to you, and also been an enormous pleasure meeting you in Japan, maybe in the
Yeah,
future
yeah, yeah.
again, maybe in
Likewise.
Australia or Europe. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
really
yeah,
been
yeah.
great.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I hope to come to another conference if there's any good ones. I'd like to make more of an effort to actually attend in person. I'm going to one. I'm doing a talk this weekend, but that's just a local small thing. But I'd like to get together and do something bigger overseas. Yeah.
Let's talk about